Okay, let's see if you can spot the pattern. Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS. Huh? So, two questions. Have you ever wondered why Nintendo went from a pretty solid and predictable handheld formula to something that in comparison is a bit weird? Or why in the world they took the Game Boy brand, one of the most recognized best-selling families in gaming history, and just never use it again? It's the Nintendo way, you may say, prioritizing new experiences and a wider demographic. Kinda, not really. According to some pretty direct sources, the story to these questions is way weirder and gives some fascinating perspectives on this age of game making. Brought to you by the Curiosity Stream and Nebula bundle. It's 2002 and there's crisis at Nintendo, or at half of Nintendo? On one side, the hardware division tasked with keeping the torch of the Famicom going with consoles had seen worse and worse results with no sign of recovery. But at the same time, the legacy of the struggles of the original Game Boy team lived on, with sales of Game Boy products continuing to go strong. Nintendo basically had complete domination of the portable console marketplace, so it was natural to start thinking about what comes next. The Game Boy line had succeeded due to its philosophy of making the best of whatever mobile technology was mature in the market at that moment, which could provide a long battery life with an affordable price. And the first step in figuring out the next part was to experiment and iterate to figure out which new technology could fit in this philosophy. And so began Project Iris, under the careful supervision of one Satoru Okada. If you have never heard that name before, he's a character that pops up frequently in previous videos of the series, and it was his vision of what the Game Boy could be that ultimately gave us a device we know and love. And as project manager for Iris, he was determined to continue this legacy. The Game Boy Iris project is one of those Nintendo devices shrouded in mystery, but a set of interviews to Okada himself for the magazine Retro Lazer actually reveals what happens to it, and the story is fascinating. According to him, Iris was in a constant state of experimentation, working from Game Boy Advance hardware and trying to figure out what functionality current technology could add up for cheap, with so many prototypes created that Okada himself has a hard time recalling the order of events. However, some functionality started sticking early into the project. First was the CPU. Previous Game Boys were already using a lot of technology made cheap by the growing phone revolution, so a jump to a relatively inexpensive ARM9 core now made it a 3D-capable console. But more exciting was all the new novel features like adding an integrated microphone and Wi-Fi compatibility, which will finally allow the new Game Boy to forego the link cable in favor of a wireless connection and potentially allow it to connect online. But as past videos should have taught you, Game Boys live or die by their screen technology. And by his own admission, Okada was obsessed with the idea of touchscreens. Nintendo has always been a master of making the best out of technology that is already established in some other industry, and around this time Japan was really hot about the idea of personal digital assistants. And one of the key features that made all of this possible was a simple yet interesting technology, the resistive touchscreen. The technology works by layering two resistive coated transparent sheets of plastic separated by a small air gap. Each sheet has horizontal and vertical lines, and when a contact is made to the surface of the touchscreen, these two sheets are pressed together, recording precisely the coordinates of where the pressure was made. The versatility it offered was unlike anything seen before. Okada had been experimenting with this technology for a long time, building prototypes using the Game Boy Advance, and by 2003 he felt the technology was mature and cheap enough to work on the next Game Boy. After having spent a small fortune on research, Okada called a meeting with the software team to present his findings, which the software team misinterpreted as a definite order and scrambled to immediately implement it in the prototype. And so the next Game Boy had a touchscreen as the core aspect of it. Inspired by cell phone designs at the time, Okada describes Iris as a full screen with a sliding mechanism that will reveal the buttons. So how come that did not become the next Game Boy then? Well, if you have watched past videos, this might not be a surprise, but what happened was Hiroshi Yamauchi. Yamauchi had been the president of Nintendo for 53 years, during which he had led the transition from a toy maker to a video game giant, and he had a knack for impulsive gut decisions that made Nintendo millions. After a very long period of internal rumors, Yamauchi had finally decided to retire as president of Nintendo, leaving the reins of the company to a certain Satoru Iwata, the first person not in the Yamauchi family to ever lead the company. Still, Yamauchi was having a hard time leaving work behind given the state of the company. He had made a gamble in his negotiations with Sony, something I'm going to eventually end up making a video about, that failed so catastrophically that over the years it eventually transformed into a monster that was actively wrecking any chance Nintendo had left in the home console marketplace, and nothing they had tried seems to be able to stop the PlayStation. Still, he took solace in the fact that the handheld division continued to reign unopposed. In one of his lesser-known fateful decisions, he had gotten creative with the Game Boy release schedule to kill competitors in the portable space. I already made a video about that. And as long as the Sony nightmare was contained to consoles, he could leave the company in the knowledge that it will survive. Sony wouldn't dare come after Nintendo handhelds, will they?
Please welcome the latest addition to the PlayStation family. It's Ridge Racer! Ridge Racer!
No, not again! Iwata, we need to be more than Sony. If they have a high-resolution screen, then we should have 2 screens. Ask your team to add a second screen now! Hi everyone, I got a request from Yamauchi-san. Please add a second screen to the next handheld. A second screen? Like a Game & Watch? Why? That makes no sense. Just do the fucking second screen. Also, I want a prototype ready for the next E3 to show to the public. And so the Game Boy Project Iris was temporarily paused and its technology recycled into an entirely new handheld codenamed Nitro, whose entirely purpose was to come out before Sony and steal some other thunder. But even if they were recycling the technology, creating a prototype for this concept of a handheld in the few months they had before the show and the announcement was impossible. So they did what every pro and every middle school kid does when they don't finish their homework in time. They faked it.
This is Nintendo DS.
Desperate, they used parts of their existing prototypes to basically build 2 machines, each one with its own screen, and connect both to give the illusion of one system. For Okada and his team, this dual-screen Yamauchi fever dream was just a quick response to counter the announcement of the PSP and will act as a third pillar, with them later resuming the work on the slider-based true successor to the Game Boy Line when they had a chance. In fact, if you're old enough to have seen the news from that fateful E3, you might remember Nintendo confusingly announcing that the true successor of the Game Boy Advance will come eventually. After the E3, the team managed to put together an actual prototype that they could start sending to studios to work on launch titles for these new machines, and surprisingly, Yamauchi's dual-screen nonsense seemed to work well with Okada's touchscreen ideas, as already some of the gameplay experiments on the new prototype had promised. Not to mention the clamshell design held the same benefits as the Game & Watch had in the sense that it made the console very sturdy and more resistant to kids' amazing ability to just destroy everything. However, Okada's was still holding on to his idea that the slider project would be a true successor to the Game Boy. The DS had proven the basic technology works. The prototype was ready, and as Nintendo prepared for the announcement of this new Game Boy,
And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
wow, Apple had exactly the same idea as you. I think maybe the timing is not that good for this new Game Boy announcement. Wait, I still have a great idea left. What about my idea of distributing games as small, downloadable packageables directly into the memory of the device over the internet? It would be like an integrated store of sorts.
And the way we're going to do it is what we call the App Store.
Yep, that's right. President Iwata, a self-professed Apple fan, felt the iPhone was way too close to what the Game Boy team was trying, and he felt the comparison was not favorable to Nintendo. And so, just like that, the Game Boy brand was shelved after decades of success. Because of the iPhone. Go freaking figure. The DS will go on to sell almost 2 times as much as the PSP on the back of a variety of games that will make a lot of interesting uses from its features and will spearhead an entire revolution on how Nintendo approaches video games. leaving me and everyone else wondering if Yamauchi was actually a legit visionary, or if the teams at Nintendo were just very good in turning his weird impulses into usable products. And Okada's ideas of games as downloadable apps will make it into the DSi, which is a crazy story in itself. You see... Whoa, wait, what the hell? Oh no, did I go on too long again and run out of artist budget? Okay, thank God we got this far. You see, there is still a story relevant to this. While we were researching this video, we ran into what we thought was one of the original DS prototypes, but actually ended up being part of a fascinating story of the Japanese devs of the modern Mario RPG series trying to develop a DS game at the same time the Game Boy team was crunching to put together their first public demo of the device, when basically no dev kits existed and no one really understood what this machine was supposed to be or even look like, and basically them trying to develop a game for a non-existing console took them through some interesting twists. So I spun that off as a companion video that is on Nebula, our streaming service you might have heard about. What's Nebula? The reason I have an art budget in the first place. Nebula is a streaming service owned by a growing number of creators to host videos without ads, extended editions, exclusive companion videos, Nebula exclusives like my documentary about RuneScape Gold Farmers, and the content keeps growing. Every new video in the Low Spec Lore series will come with a companion video in Nebula, and it is the support of those of you watching there that makes it possible so I can pay my artists in the first place. Oh shit, it's really running out this time.